Hello, everyone. Welcome. Great to see you all. Hello, hello. I see some familiar names from the last workshop. It's amazing that you all are joining us for the second. We're going to give it maybe another minute for some folks to make their way in. And then we're going to get started. Let's see. Share my screen. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Awesome. All righty. Okay, so welcome everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Taylor Jackson. I am the Director of Grants at Houston Arts Alliance, and I'm really excited to have you all here today. This is our first round of Let Creativity Happen that's opened up for the year. And the workshop that we're going to be presenting today is all of the information that you need to know about applying for Let Creativity Happen grant. It will be available online after this workshop. So if you need to access it at a later time, you can go to the workshop page on our website and you'll be able to see a link to view this information again there. So I just want to kind of, break down the lay of the land, let you know what we'll be covering today. First, we'll talk a little bit about HAA, our work, what we do. We'll talk about our funding source, which of course funds all of our grant programs. I'll touch on the grant programs, but more specifically, I'll touch on Let Creativity Happen, since that is the reason for you all being here at this workshop today. We'll cover some information that's important to applying for our grants, all of our grants, honestly, especially as it relates to eligibility and supplemental materials that we're looking for in your application. As it relates to the application, the grants portal is another important touch point. I'll show you how to navigate that portal and specifically how to fill out the budget table, which can be a little bit of a pain point sometimes for folks filling out the application. So we want to make sure that you get enough information to have a clear understanding of how to fill out that budget template and that table in our application. We'll also kind of go over what happens after you submit your application, the life cycle of our application process. And then we'll dream a little bit and talk about what happens if you are actually accepted for an award. And so with that, we will jump right in. Let's talk about Houston Arts Alliance. Who are we? So Houston Arts Alliance, HAA, is a local arts and cultural organization whose principal work is to implement the city of Houston's vision, values, and goals for its arts, grant making, and civic art investments. HAA's work, specifically the work of the grant department, is conducted through a contract that we have with the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, whom we refer to as MOCA. But HAA also executes privately funded special projects to meet the needs of the arts community, such as disaster preparation, research on the state of arts in Houston, and temporary public art projects that vitalize neighborhoods. Our funding, where does it come from? So the city of Houston provides all funds for HAA's competitive grant programs. Our funds are sourced from the hotel occupancy tax, which we refer to as HOT. An allocation of HOT is dedicated to supporting arts, culture, and tourism in the city, programming that is accessible to the Houston community and its visitors, and is created by individual artists, creatives, 501c3 nonprofits, and fiscally sponsored programs. Let's break down the allocation of HOT that we receive specifically at HAA. So 74.5% of the hot revenue that we receive goes directly to the community. It's going directly into these competitive grant programs. 16.5% goes to Miller Outdoor Theater, who also uses hot funds to run their version of grant funding for arts and cultural organizations throughout the city, and 9% of the funding goes towards our administration fees. Of that 74.5% that's going directly to our grant programs, 36% goes to organizations with budget sizes over $10 million as a part of our Support for Organizations grant program. And then we have another 36% that's allocated to organizations with budgets under $10 million as a part of our Support for Organizations grant program. It also goes to our Support for Artists and Creative Individuals grant program, our Let Creativity Happen grant program, and our Festival grant program. And then we have another slither, 2.5%, that goes directly to our city's Initiative grant program. Here's a list of all of the grant programs that we offer through HAA. I won't go into detail about each of these programs, but here you will find some information about how much you can request for each of these grant programs and the grant term. Also, one thing that I want to point out specifically for Let Creativity Happen, all of the awards are funded through cash in hand, meaning these are funds that we have already collected and will be giving out to the community. All right, so let's delve into some specifics around Let Creativity Happen. The Let Creativity Happen grant program is designed to encourage artists, creative individuals, and organizations to take creative risks that may not qualify for more traditional funding opportunities. Awards will support innovative ideas that redefine artistic boundaries, reshape the conversation about art and art experiences, and or establish unique opportunities to experience art. I'm going to get into the application here just so we can review the questions that you'll see either in the guidelines or once you go into the portal. So the application is basically broken down into 3 different sections. The first section is the artistic programming section. Here, what's really important is that your artistic goals, your vision, and the process that you're using to implement your programming is clearly outlined. The applicant should also demonstrate artistic and cultural vibrancy by way of their project. And the applicant should communicate well-defined public programming that is imaginative and innovative for Houstonians, and visitors. The only subsection, if you will, of the artistic programming section is the detailed project proposal section. This is worth 30 points. And this is where you describe your project proposal in detail. You're going to describe what the project is, when and where it's happening, its innovative qualities, and who is involved in the project. The next section we have is the public benefits section. And here you're going to really delve into how your project connects to a defined community. You're going to speak to your strategies for marketing and audience engagement that are inclusive and publicly accessible. And you'll also speak to how the project is inviting to its community and the broader public. This section is broken into 2 subsections. We have the community impact section, which is 30 points. Here, you're going to describe your community. You're going to talk about how your project meaningfully connects to your defined community. And in the collective creative identity subsection, which is worth 20 points, you're going to describe how your proposed work contributes to Houston's creative identity as a unique arts and cultural destination.
Yes.
The last section is the stewardship of public resources section. Here you're going to demonstrate the appropriate preparations and judgment that you use to complete the proposed activities. You're also going to speak to your budget, and the panel will be assessing whether or not that budget is feasible. And you'll also demonstrate whether or not you're making payment to artists. This section mostly consists of the budget table, and I'm going to get into a more expansive exploration of how to fill out that table, as I mentioned earlier, later on in the presentation. So we won't get into that right now, but it's coming, I promise. All right, let's get out of here. So what makes a successful project? What are some elements that you should think about as you're constructing your narrative and putting together your application? So one, community engagement. You should also really think about measurable impact, documenting support of local artists and creatives. And this last line does not necessarily apply to like Creativity Happen. It applies to another grant program. But if you can speak to those three highlighted elements, community engagement, measurable impact, and documented support of local artists and creatives, that will help create a well-rounded project proposal. Here are our upcoming deadlines for Let Creativity Happen. Of course, the first round is currently open and closes April 23rd at 11:59 p.m. Round 2 will open May 27th and close June 25th, 2024 at 11:59 p.m. And round 3 will open August 30th, close September 29th at 11:59 p.m. I also want to mention, it was on a previous slide, but applicants are eligible to apply for funding up to $2,500 for Let Creativity Happen. Okay, let's get into some other important aspects of the application process, specifically as it relates to eligibility requirements, what our funds cannot support, work samples, other requirements specific to applying for Let Creativity Happen, and for those interested, fiscal sponsorship definition and requirements as well. So starting with eligibility requirements, we'll walk through these one at a time. The first is proof of headquarters or residency. So all applicants must demonstrate a physical address in the city of Houston limits, and the staff verifies this through the online council member mapping tool. You can find a link to that tool in the guidelines and in the application portal. I highly, highly, highly encourage everybody, even if your address says Houston in it, to just triple check and use that link to ensure that your address is within City of Houston limits before doing the labor of putting together an application and submitting. I can't tell you, how many folks we have do the work and then get to the end to figure out that their address is outside of the City of Houston limits. So I highly encourage you all to check that ahead of time. Just because your address says Houston does not mean it's in City of Houston limits. Your address could say Katy, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's outside of the City of Houston limits. So I would just triple check to make sure before, again, submitting your application. PO boxes are not accepted as they do not establish residency or headquarters within City of Houston limits. And we do ask applicants to upload an official documentation that shows the physical address inside City of Houston limits. For individuals, this documentation could look like a state issued ID or a driver's license, a current lease agreement, or a phone or utility bill from the calendar year 2024. Organizations, it could be mail from a government entity addressed to the organization. Again, that mail needs to be from the calendar year 2024. It could be a current lease agreement or a bank statement. And the same goes for fiscal sponsors, who will also need to provide proof of headquarters. If you are sending in, like I said, a phone or utility bill, a bank statement, anything from a third party, it needs to be dated within the 2024 calendar year to make sure that your residency is current as of this year. So please make sure that you have that date on there. If we can't find a date, we might send it back and ask you to provide us with, documentation that includes a date from 2024. For individual applicants, you must be 18 years or older to apply, and we do ask for proof of age. Acceptable documents include, again, a driver's license or a Texas identification card, a valid unexpired passport, a U.S. certificate of citizenship, or a certificate of naturalization, an unexpired U.S. military identification card. This is not an exhaustive list. If you have questions around if your proof is acceptable, never hesitate to reach out to the team so that we can clarify that for you. For organizations that are applying, the organization needs to have tax exemption status under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3, which we will verify by the IRS tax exemption organization search. If you are an organization or a collective that does not have that 501c3 status, you can apply through a fiscal sponsor, so long as that fiscal sponsor, again, is located within the city of Houston limits and has that 501c3 tax exemption status. Another really big, important component to eligibility, you need to make sure you have a clear public presentation. This is required by all of our grantees and applicants. During the grant term, you need to have at least one in-person event or one live virtual presentation. You must identify the publicly accessible in-person or live virtual event in your application. The event must be open to the general public. It can be ticketed. Public presentations are allowed to be ticketed. However, they cannot exclude the public or limit who might be a member of the audience. If you have a capacity issue, if you have limited capacity, maybe due to seating restrictions or capacity restrictions, everyone must have equal access and opportunity to attend the public presentation on a first come, first served basis. Some examples of public presentations that applicants and grantees have put on in the past include art exhibitions, film screenings, music, dance, or theater performances, literary recordings and publications, local arts festivals, other activities. This is by no means an exhaustive list. And a few examples of some live virtual events that have taken place include live streamed concerts or performances, virtual artist talks, virtual Q&As, and of course, other activities, as this is not an exhaustive list. If you have questions around whether your public presentation is eligible, again, don't hesitate to reach out to the team, and we can sort of workshop, with you if you have or need any clarity around that. A few other things that are important when you're considering your public presentation. If you're a nonprofit organization or applicant whose primary programming takes place in K through 12 schools or is arts education focused, you must have a public facing arts program or public event that is open to the general public. Public programming can be geared towards youth audiences, but it must be accessible to everyone, as an example. The applicant will also be responsible for securing the necessary permits, permissions, insurance, and approvals for any proposal that requires city permits or clearances, including but not limited to publicly installed art, street closures, sound amplification in public spaces, or murals. Also, a nonprofit organization whose primary mission is not the public presentation or exhibition of arts and cultural programming should focus their application on the public-facing arts programming they are proposing in the application. A couple other important rules that I want to make sure that I hit. So applicants may only submit one application for each individual grant program. In other words, applicants cannot send multiple applications to the same grant program. So if you are applying for this first round of Let Creativity Happen, you cannot submit two different applications for this first round of Let Creativity Happen. Another point, if you are awarded a Let Creativity Happen grant within this calendar year, you are not eligible to apply again in future rounds that happen in 2024. So you can only receive one Let Creativity Happen grant a year. Applicants cannot use the same project proposal to apply to more than one grant program. Applicants should decide which grant program best aligns with their project goals and apply to that specific program. So using this as an example, you cannot submit the same application proposal for the same project to Cities Initiative and Let Creativity Happen. You have to choose one or the other to apply, for that one project. Now, if you have two totally different projects and you want to apply to CI for one project, Cities Initiative for one project, and Let Creativity Happen for a completely different project, that is acceptable. It just can't be the same project that you apply to both opportunities for. Couple other specific eligibility requirements. If you are an artist who works in an artistic capacity with a nonprofit organization, maybe as an artistic director, an executive director, a resident artist, and you want to apply for a grant as an individual, you must apply with a program that is independent of the organization that you work for. For collaborative art programs, one artist must serve as the applicant for the project. And all members need to meet the eligibility requirements. A collaborator is defined as someone who is the co-owner of the program and a generative part of the team. Subcontractors are not necessarily considered collaborators. And again, if you need any clarity around that for your project proposal specifically, reach out to the team and we got you. All right, so for those who might be interested in fiscal sponsorship, just a little bit of information. So we define a fiscal sponsorship as a project that's an organization or a collective, etc., that does not have federal IRS tax exempt status required to apply for a grant as an organization and has entered into a fiscal sponsorship agreement with an organization that has that 501c3 status to be eligible. All fiscal sponsors must adhere to the previous requirements that I mentioned, as well as the projects, the collective or the organization that they are fiscally sponsoring. You will need to upload a copy of your fiscal sponsorship agreement in the grants portal if you are using a fiscal sponsor, and we have the specific fiscal sponsorship requirements laid out in the grant guidelines. So I would make sure to pay special attention to that section if you are either a fiscally sponsored project or a fiscal sponsor applying for a grant. Okay, let's get into what HAA grants cannot support. First and foremost, we cannot support activities taking place outside of the City of Houston limits, including outlying suburbs. Your program location must be represented by a Houston City Council member, verified through the online council member verifying mapping tool. So not only does your residency or headquarters need to be in the City of Houston limits, but your program also needs to take place within the City of Houston limits. So if you have a venue or a space that you plan on doing your event, your programming, you also need to make sure that you take that address and run it through the Who is My Council Member mapping tool to make sure that that venue or that space is taking place inside the City of Houston limits. Grants cannot be applied to programs outside of the grant term. Activities must take place within the respective grant term. So for instance, for this first round of Let Creativity Happen, the grant term is August 2024 to August 2025. So your program, your project needs to take place within that time period in order to be eligible. Events with exclusive audiences that do not allow participation of the general public, such as a 21 up event, or a youth specific event or a gender specific event, is not eligible for funding. Again, it needs to be open to the general public. It needs to be accessible to any and everyone. Competitions, award ceremonies, scholarships, cash prizes, fundraising activities and events, sports and recreation activities, or parties and private celebrations are not eligible for funding. Any activities being funded by Miller Outdoor Theater, since it's also being supported by the HOT Fund. So as I mentioned earlier, they also receive a portion of this HOT. If you are receiving funding for a project through Miller Outdoor Theater, you cannot apply to HAA for a grant for that same project. City of Houston employees, elected officials, mayor office staff, and their immediate family are not eligible for HAA grants. Neither Houston Arts Alliance employees, board members, and their immediate families. Grants to K through 12 public, private, or charter schools are not eligible for support. And educational programs such as workshops or youth education programs are not eligible for support. And this is a not necessarily a new rule, but we're highlighting it hopefully a little bit more clearly in the guidelines this year. So if you are applying as an arts educational program, your application should center around the public presentation of your programming that is open to the general public. So for example, let's say you are an organization that does after school programming for youth. The after school program itself, because it is exclusionary and that it is only for youth, is not eligible for HAA funding. However, let's say that summer, that after school program culminates with a artist exhibition or showcase of the students' work. That showcase, that art exhibition, that performance is eligible for funding. So if you have any questions around whether or not, especially if you're doing educational programming, whether or not your project is eligible or not, please make sure to double check with the team so we can kind of talk that through with you as you write your application. Trade fairs, events of primarily commercial nature or consumer shows are not eligible. For-profit applicants may apply through a fiscal sponsor with 501c3 status. And faith-based organizations using funds for any activities that have primarily religious purpose or any activities that exist as a part of a religious sermon or service are not eligible for funding. Lastly, any activities receiving funds from other HAA grant programs are not eligible. Organizations and or individual applicants collaborating on the same project cannot separately apply for support to fund this collaborative program. So in other words, you cannot have multiple submissions from different applicants for the same program or project. And you cannot have multiple submissions to the same grant program from the same organization or individual applicant. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about work samples. So this is really important because this is an opportunity to really, in a audible or visual way, display your work to the panel. There's not sort of face-to-face time that you get to have with the panel to really show your work after you hit submit. So this is how you do that, through your work samples. You must upload documentation of your work to demonstrate its vibrancy as it relates to the proposed project or the applicant's body of work. You can upload 5 individual images or audio files and 5 PDFs, not exceeding 100 megabytes each. You can also, and we encourage, including text descriptions to help panelists understand work samples. If you have maybe audio or video samples that are larger than the allotted amount, you can also include those as links in the PDFs that the panelists can click on and navigate their way to, the platform that you use. Maybe it's Vimeo or YouTube. I would just make sure if you are using like a Drive-based platform like a Vimeo, that you include a password so that the panelists can actually access the file or the video or audio sample. All right. So now that we've covered everything that is important to actually, applying for Let Creativity Happen, let's talk about where you apply. That's the grants portal. And you can locate this portal at haa.smartsimple.com. You'll want to log in or register if you are new to the system. Once you are signed in, you will see a My Profile button and an Organization Profile button. If you're applying as an individual, you'll hit My Profile. And if you're applying as an organization, you'll hit Organization Profile. Once you click either of those buttons, or even just scroll down to the bottom of the profile page, you'll see the funding opportunities that are available for you to apply for. Something that I want to highlight about this, let's say that you started a Let Creativity Happen application last year for round 3, and for whatever reason you didn't submit. Make sure that if you are deciding to apply this year, round 1, 2024, that you are applying under the right grant cycle. If you work from the draft that you have of an old application and get to the end, it's going to tell you that you are not able to submit because the deadline has passed. So you really, really want to check and make sure that you are applying under the right grant cycle. And it will tell you and highlight to you, this is the one that you should apply to. It'll say apply now. So don't work from an old draft. Work from a current application that is open for the current grant cycle. All right. So the other thing that I mentioned earlier that I want to make sure that we cover as it relates to the grants portal is how to fill out the budget table. So here we have an example of what that table looks like. You will use the income and expense table to report the full cost of your proposed arts and cultural programming. So this includes not only what you are requesting from HAA, but also if you have any other funds secured by other funders, sponsors, other means of income, you'll want to make sure that you include that information there as well. If recommended for funding, the award amounts will follow the guidelines for the specific grant program to which the applicant applies. So let's start with the income section and break that down a little bit. So when you're filling out the income section, which is at the very top of the budget table, in row 1, you're going to see contributed City of Houston. That is the amount that you are requesting from HAA. So you're going to list the amount of your grant request under amount of request. So if, again, you're applying for Let Creativity Happen, hopefully you request $2,500 since that is the max. You'll put under or next to contributed City of Houston HAA grant, $2,500. In rows 2 through 9, you'll list other funding sources under the other funds column. So let's say you received money for this project from Houston Endowment. You'll put in the other funds column how much you received from them for this particular project. If you got no donations, you'll put how much you received in donations in this other fund column. So you'll want to make sure, again, that you list all of the funds related to the project, not only the amount of the request that you are expecting or requesting from HAA, but also any other funds that you've received for this project or anticipated funds. In the expense section, which is located down here at the bottom, you'll see amount of so under amount of request, the same sort of section, you'll want to only input expenses that would be covered by the grant if you are to receive it, by the grant from HAA. So for marketing, artistic personnel, administrative personnel, technical personnel, production expenses, in this amount of request section, you're only going to fill in funding related to expense that you are requesting from HAA, and it should match up with what you put in the income section. So for instance, if you're requesting $2,500 as the total amount of your request, the amount that you are going to spend based on those HAA funds should also equal out to $2,500. Same with the other funds section. So you're going to list out how you're going to spend what you've received or what you anticipate to receive from the other funders. You'll list that out here, and it should match up with what you have in the income section that's tallied all of the other funds that you have received. And if you have any issues and need any sort of technical support filling out the budget table, I'm going to say it again, make sure to reach out to the team so that we can assist you. Also, be sure to review what may not be funded in the grant guidelines to ensure that you are only putting in eligible expenses for the amount that you are requesting from HAA. You can use the description text box in each row to provide additional detail about the income or expense line item. So for instance, if you want to explain what you mean by artistic personnel, and that's artist fees for artists, I would include that in the description so that the panel has a better understanding of how you are allocating these funds. All right, let's cover specific expenses that are not permitted. Again, make sure to review this section of the guidelines before you fill out the budget table. If you have a significant amount of ineligible expenses that are a part of your budget, it could lead to your application being rendered ineligible. So I would really pay close attention to make sure that you aren't putting anything in those budget lines that are not eligible to be funded by HAA. So first and foremost, we do not cover travel outside of the city of Houston. We do not cover deficits, loans, interest on loans, fines, penalties, or costs of litigation. We do not cover professional development training for the applicant, such as classes, coaching, conferences, or workshops. We cannot cover the purchase of a single material or equipment item exceeding $250, except rental costs directly affiliated with the funded project. So to explain that a little better, if you are renting a venue for your project, for your event, and the venue cost is $3,000 to rent, that is totally okay. If you need a camera for your project and you want to purchase a camera that is over $250, that is not eligible to be funded by way of the grant. If you need to rent a camera for your project and the rental cost of the camera is over $250, that is okay. So the real distinction is, basically between what you are purchasing and what you are renting. You cannot purchase any one thing over $250, but you can rent things over $250. Hopefully that's clear. We also cannot fund capital expenses such as the purchase of property or land, building construction or renovation, or landscape adaptations. And we cannot cover food. We cannot fund meals, refreshments, or catering expenses. All right. So almost a Q&A. I know this has been a lot of information, but just bear with me a little longer. Want to talk about what happens after you hit submit, the life cycle of our application process. First, and I'll break these down a little bit more individually, but after you hit submit, first the staff is going to review for eligibility. We're going to make sure that the application is complete, that you have that public presentation made clear, and score any objective criteria. After an application is deemed eligible, it then moves forward to our peer panels. We use a competitive peer review process to score eligible grant applications. After the panelists have done their work, we have the scores and ranks for the applications. We know who's being recommended, who's not, who's been considered eligible. We forward all of that information to the HAA Grants Committee, who reviews our process to make sure that it was followed with integrity and as we have publicly communicated by way of our guidelines and applications and workshops. And then after that committee approval, it is then forwarded to the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, and recommendations are not finalized until we have that final approval from the mayor. So to speak to these different parts of the process a little bit more intentionally, so during the eligibility verification process, we also have what we call the curing process. And applications that have missing or incorrect documentation will be notified for rectification if it qualifies to be cured. The staff will notify applicants with whatever is missing or incorrect via email. The email notification will provide applicants with the opportunity to cure the missing or incorrect documentation within 4 business days from the date of notification. Something really important to note, all grant notifications are sent solely via email to the applicant and or the applicant's primary grant contract designated in the HAA Online Grants portal. So if you are the applicant or if you are the primary grant contact, that is the only email address that we will send notifications to. So, if maybe the person who applied for the grant, maybe if you're an organization, has left and is no longer there, and all of the emails are still being sent to that email address, you'll want to make sure that you check that email so that you do not miss the curing notification if something needs to be cured, because we do not accept any materials after that curing deadline passed. So as soon as you hit submit, honestly, I would monitor your email for a couple of weeks just to ensure you don't receive an email notification saying that something needs to be cured. Applicants may be prompted to cure the following. Maybe it's unacceptable proof of age documentation. Maybe it's unacceptable proof of residency documentation. Maybe you submitted to multiple grant programs for the same project, or you submitted multiple applications to the same grant program. Either way, you will receive a notification for whatever needs to be rectified. And again, you have 4 business days to sort of turn that around in order to try to make your application eligible. Applications are not reopened to correct narratives, work samples, responses to questions, or budget tables. So none of those things are eligible to be cured. No information, again, will be accepted after the curing deadline that is indicated in the notification email. So you will be given the specific date and time that you have to get that information back to us. If we do not receive it by that date and time, your application will be deemed ineligible and will not be considered for funding. Also, if you have any concerns regarding eligibility determination, after you receive maybe a notification that your application was determined ineligible, we do have a grants appeals process. You can find that information on our website. I would just make sure to read that document thoroughly to make sure that you are eligible to appeal. All right, so let's say you've submitted your application, it's been deemed eligible. Now it's going to move to the panel part of our process. And again, we use a competitive peer review process to score and rank all eligible applications. This is a long-time national practice of engaging community representatives with arts expertise to make critical decisions about public funding competitions. Something that's really important to note is that this process removes HAA staff and board and their immediate family from the evaluation of grant applications, except for objective scoring sections outlined in the guidelines. So, you know, HAA staff and board, we designed the competition, we designed the process, right? However, we are not at all involved in the scoring or the commenting of the applications. We facilitate the panel discussions. However, we have no influence on how the applications are scored. If you're interested in being a panelist, this is where I'll kind of like do my little plug. We invite you all to submit your information. It's really important to us that our panels include a diversity of skills and self-identity, art form expertise and experience, so that we can ensure that all of the applications are being properly assessed. So, you know, I think that paneling is not only not I mean, it's great that you're able to do this as a service to the community, right? But I also think it's a great learning tool if you are interested in applying. I've had so many panelists who are also applicants come to me and say that, you know, learning the what the panelists sort of prioritized and how they assessed the applications helped them reframe how they put together applications moving forward. And they felt like, you know, it helped strengthen their narratives and how they put together the budget, because they could really understand sort of like how the panelists are assessing and evaluating the applications. So if you are interested, you can, you know, plan on applying for a grant and still become a panelist. We will just make sure that we don't put you on a panel where your application is being discussed. So there is no conflict there. If you have any interest, please submit your information. And if that was not enough to convince you, there's also a $300 honorarium. So we hope to see, you know, some of you all here today, your names come through as a potential panelist in the future. All right, so after the panel finishes their scores, we determine the ranks based on the scores. We look at the budget to see how much money we have to award and determine the recommended and not recommended list based on all of that information. That is assembled into a packet and forwarded to the Houston Arts Alliance Grants Committee, which again reviews and votes to ensure that the panel process was followed with integrity, not only the panel process, but the application process, the scoring process, all of that. The committee does not alter the recommendation from the panel's adjudication. They do not determine the award amounts. They are just looking at the process and making sure that the process was followed, again, with integrity. After the committee approves the recommendation packets, that packet is then forwarded to the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, and recommendations are not finalized until the City of Houston approval process is complete. So the mayor ultimately has the final say before we send out notifications. Okay, now on to dreaming, right? You submitted your application, it was eligible, it scored great with the panels, the committee approved the process, the mayor has approved the recommendations, and you are getting a Let Creativity Happen great. All is right in Houston, right? So after you receive your notification email, you will receive a grantee contract, a grantee agreement that you will need to sign in order to get your first payment. After you receive that contract and sign it, get it back over to us, we process it with finance. It takes about 2 to 3 weeks, to be honest with you, and you will receive 80% of your award at that time. Now, we'll use the first round of Let Creativity Happen as an example. Again, that grant term is August 2024 to August 2025. You can complete your project at any time within the grant term and submit your final report. So let's say you get started in August and you're done by December, your public presentation has happened, you're done. You can submit your final report at that time. Once you submit your final report, again, that will be processed by the grant staff, who will make sure that they've reviewed your final report and that it is approved. Once it is approved, we'll send the information to finance, who will start processing your final payment. Again, that also might take a couple of weeks. And once you receive your payment, it will be 20% of your overall award. So you get 80% at contract signing, and you get 20%, the remaining 20% after approval of your final, after submission and approval of your final report. Just to touch on the final report really quickly, all of our grant programs have a grant term that is 12 months, it's a year long. And then you have 30 days after the end of your grant term to get us your final report. So if your grant term is up December 31st, 2024, then you have until January 30th, 2025 to submit your final report. There are 4 components that are really important when it comes to your final report, and you want to make sure that you are mindful of these things over the course of the grant term. 1, you need to submit your public presentation to the cultural events calendar. You need to make sure that your marketing materials show a crediting line and logo referencing support from the City of Houston and Houston Arts Alliance. You'll want to make sure that you fill out the final report budget so that we can see a list of the grant expenditures. And then you also want to submit work samples. These are images, links, or videos documenting the event. So again, just something to be mindful of as you're, moving through the grant term, as these are things that will be a requirement for you to upload and submit as a part of your final report. All right, so that is all of the information that I have related to Let Creativity Happen at this time. And we can shift and I can answer any questions that you all might have. I'm gonna stop share so I can see people. Yes, Rain.
Hello, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very, very thorough. I did want to ask for organizations or individuals that want to do a particular project, but it requires expertise of other artists. Will there be resources for us to be able to identify artists to help us fulfill a project? Like, for example, if we wanted to do a collaborative mural, but we just don't have an artist in mind who's an expert in doing murals, could we lean on HAA to help point us in the direction of other artists that would be in alignment with what we're trying to do?
That's a great question. So at this time, we don't really have like a repository or a directory, if you will, of artists that maybe specialize or have different artistic expertise. That being said, you could potentially look at our grantee list on the website. There you'll see a list of all of our grantees from the past year and a description of their project, what was awarded, and how to connect to those grantees, either by way of Twitter, Instagram, or email, the information that they provided to us. That could be a helpful resource if you're looking to connect with other artists. But again, it would be based on like the project proposal that was awarded. So you might sort of have to assess whether or not it's kind of in line with what you're looking for, based on your interpretation of what their expertise might be.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Of course.
And just real quick, there are 2 questions in the chat from Ann Park. If exhibition is not yet confirmed, can you still list it on a grant application?
Like if the venue is not confirmed? So yes, I would say that if maybe you don't have the venue or all of the details worked out as it relates to, or not even worked out, but solidified as it relates to your project, I would include as much information as possible and speak to, potential venues, potential collaborations, and maybe even giving the panelists a timeline for when you would like to have those venues or collaborations locked in and secured. So as much information as you could provide, I think would be helpful to the panel. There is an understanding that because you are applying for this project, you may not have everything necessarily worked out yet. You're waiting to see if you get the funding for it. So it would not be, like a shock or a surprise to the panel if you don't necessarily have all of those details locked in. But like I said, if you can just give potential venues, potential collaborators, when you'd like to have that locked in, as much detail as possible would be helpful for the panel to understand your vision for the project. Any other questions?
Hello, I just have a general question. So for the budget table, you need to include all the income, but if it has been completed already, but it was completed in fiscal 2024, but before August of 2024, do you still need to list that?
So if the project has already been completed before the grant term, it's actually not eligible to receive money. The project has to happen within the grant term. So
Okay.
yeah, so if you're doing
So
a project,
my question is not particular if I receive the grant from another, another entity, but before August, do I still need to include it?
yes. So you would include any for the project that you are applying for, you will include any funding that you have received to execute that project. And yeah, if you're applying for this first round, then it will absolutely be clear that it was before the start of the grant term, which is totally fine. We're just making sure that the panel has a full understanding of the funding that you have to do the project. So
Even if
yeah.
it was prior to August 2024, I should still need to include that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because yeah, even if it's prior to 2024, if it is for the project that you are applying to HAA for, if it's, if you're applying to do an art exhibition for, you want to do an art exhibition and you're applying to let creativity happen for that, and you received money, let's say from Houston Endowment for that art exhibition that you are applying for HAA money for, then you will need to include that funding as a part of your budget for the project.
So if it's at a different venue or different types of presentation where you will be presenting your work, would that be the same thing?
So you'll only include funding for the project that you are applying for. If you're applying for a project that you don't currently have funding for, you won't include that. If you're applying for a project that you currently or even anticipate getting funding for, you will include that funding in the budget table.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Of course, of course. And again, as you start working through the budget table, if you need help sort of figuring out how to fill it out, the team is here to offer some tech support to you. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Maybe the stupidest question in the world, but I heard a lot about being sponsored by a nonprofit or having some kind of relationship or whatever. And what if you're an individual artist who is not incorporated like a business as themselves? and they're applying as an individual, how do you do that?
You
Does
would
it,
you would just apply as an individual. So fiscal sponsorships are really only for organizations or collectives that don't have 501c3 status, but want to apply as an organization. You are told if you're applying as an individual, you are totally okay to apply as an individual without a fiscal sponsor.
and then that means the maximum is $2,500, correct?
Yes, for everyone, whether you're an organization, fiscally sponsored, or an individual, the max that you can apply for is 2,500.
That's all I got. Thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Of course, of course. Thank you all. So I will say that our support does not end here. If you need us, we are here to support you through your application process. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. And have some important links here. We also, I think, dropped the link tree in the chat. If you would like to have sort of a one-stop shop to all of the links that are relevant to applying for an HAA grant, whether it's applying, requesting a meeting to meet with the staff, or applying to be a panelist, or looking at the guidelines, all of it is included in that link tree. It's a great resource. And yeah, we're here to support and help with anything that you might need support in as you navigate this application process. So thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate you. I hope y'all have an amazing Friday, a great weekend, and best of luck to you on your application journey. Thank you.